Hi YouTube, I'm Lance and this is Ultimate Postman. Today we have a mid-2010 MacBook Pro. Us techs love to hate Apple and we hate to love Apple. I will repair just about any of the Apple products as long as parts are available and it's a repair that can be done on it. For this mid-2010 MacBook Pro, it has a bad keyboard. Unfortunately, the process of replacing the keyboard is really tedious. Let's get into it. On all of the newest model MacBook Pros, MacBooks, MacBook Airs, the keyboard on the back is welded in. You can remove some of the screws, but most of them, specifically down here, are welded in. So it's just, or riveted in, and it's just easier to replace the keyboard as a whole than to try and go through, pop out all this stuff, pop it back in. Now, we had already replaced the keyboard for this customer another time, but what you have to do is remove the 10 screws around the bottom, and then you've got to pull off the motherboard, or as Apple calls it, the logic board, the two fans, the optical drive, and then we'll be able to replace the keyboard. Pro tech tip here, I've been taking apart laptops for years. I've taken apart so many laptops, I don't need a diagram. I don't need a little mat to put them on in the order they came out in. I use a pillbox. I start from the most outside and I work my way all the way to the most inside screws. This is how I keep my screws organized as I'm taking apart laptops. After you remove the motherboard and everything else, you get to the backlight here, which you have to be very careful to remove and not damage unless you're just replacing the backlight. There's multiple parts to it. You have a plastic cover on it, and then you have multiple layers in there. Under here, you have 70, 80 plus little screws you have to remove from the keyboard, and then also from the power switches right over there. You also have to be very careful not to break any of these cables, otherwise you have to replace the cable or the component the cable is attached to, because you don't want to be messing around with trying to open up other parts of the laptop that you don't have to. The nice thing I like about these pill boxes is you can close up every component. So this is for the outside of the laptop. This is for the first layer in, which includes the fans and some of the covers. This is for the motherboard. This is for the optical drive and all that. This is for the area right here, which you don't have on a lot of MacBooks. It's for this little PCI connector. And then this next area is for all the small screws. As I go through, I can close it and lock it up so these don't open up in case I was to ever knock this over. Now that we have all the screws out, if you are replacing something other than the keyboard and you need to put the keyboard back in, you cannot damage this cable. This cable is for the power cable. Now, when you pull it out, you may have to remove an additional screw to get it out from underneath. Now, it's very important you don't damage this cable. Now, under the cable, you have a little spring style mechanism. It's just a really thin sheet of metal that helps it when you push it in for it to spring, for the actual button down there to spring back. So let's replace this guy. Here it is empty, and here's the new keyboard. There's the old one. Now remember earlier how I said it's important not to damage any of the other cables. Well, when you're reinstalling it, it's important not to get any cable caught under the board, like the trackpad cable, otherwise you won't be able to connect it. Also important to remember, once you get the power cable back in, you have to screw it down, otherwise it doesn't work properly. There's two screws, they just have to go back in. Now that I've got the keyboard back in and screwed in, what's the difference between it and the non-Apple keyboards? Well, these guys are from Dell's and HP's, and just like so many other manufacturers, these ones do not have to be screwed in, or if they do, it's just by a couple of screws, maybe 5 at the most, between the bottom and the top of the case. I take that back. Some keyboards from PCs often have a few more screws in them, but nowhere near to 80 screws just on the keyboard. Some of them might have about 10 screws on the keyboard themselves, and getting to the keyboard is a lot easier than going through the entire case. Versus the Apple 80 plus screws. Come on, Apple. I mean, whoever designs stuff from Apple, it looks nice on the outside, but in terms of repairability and internal ergonomics in terms of repairs, it's terrible. They basically make their system so they really only want Apple people, and by Apple people I mean Apple themselves, to repair it, versus independent shops like myself or even the Apple Store. The Apple Store oftentimes sends out all of their products to get repaired elsewhere. When you put it back on, you gotta pull all the cables up through. Except for the keyboard cable, it's cool, except for the fact that it's hard to do this and put it into the slot unless you have something to stick on to it to help you grip. All done. It's working. The last step, of course, is to log in, which I'm not going to log in here on camera, but log in, make sure everything works on the laptop, make sure everything is connected back properly, and you're set to go. Apple product designers, they're not all bad, but for the most part, taking apart an Apple versus taking apart a PC-based product is night and day difference for most of the products. If Apple could only get better at designing their stuff so regular people could work on it. Consider liking, commenting, subscribing, and we'll catch you soon.